Yes, thank you for coming. I'm sorry that it sounds like a swamp in here. You probably won't be able to hear it on the camera, but there's a low groaning noise coming from the next room, which gives the place a really weird atmosphere. But yeah, I'm Tom Francis. I'm a writer for PC Gamer, and I've been doing that for 9 years. So my day job is to review games and preview them and write features about them and stuff, which means I spend a lot of my time criticizing games and trying to understand why they're good and why they're bad, and telling other people they've done it wrong. And 2 years ago, I decided I'd start making one myself. And that's Gunpoint. In fact, I should be playing you the trailer. There's no sound on this because this is the actual trailer for the game, and the sound is me talking over it. So it'll be a very similar experience to what you're getting now. It's actually playable here at Minecon over in the indie area of Times Square. So if anyone needs to leave during this, I'm just going to assume you're rushing off to play it now, and I'll be very flattered. Yes, I apologize if I mumble or talk too fast, which I've been told I do. If I do that, just put up your hand and I'll know I'm rambling. And also, I'm going to try not to swear. I don't have a lot of practice not swearing. So if I do swear, I'd like you to gasp as if I said something absolutely terrible, even if it's not that bad, and I will know I've done something wrong. So Gunpoint is a stealth game where you play as that little guy, who is a freelance spy. So you take jobs from clients to break into these buildings and get to usually a PC or something that you're trying to steal some data from, or there are other objectives later on. And the way you do it is with a device called the crosslink, and you switch to a different mode, which you saw just now, but I'm not seeing now, where you can see how the whole building is wired up, so you see all of the electrical connections. So you will see a line going from a light switch to a light, and that tells you that the light switch will activate the light. But then you can just drag that connection to anything you like, so you could drag it to an electronic security door, and then when you press the light switch, that door will open, which is how you solved that last level. So it's kind of it's a hacking thing, but it's more flexible than just turning like turrets to your side. Like I say, I'm making it in my spare time, and I don't have a huge amount of spare time, which is why I've been working on it for 2 years and it's not finished yet. And something I always heard before I made one was that making games is incredibly hard. I talked to a lot of developers, and usually not in interviews, but then just afterwards when I hang out, they'll say something to the effect of, God, making games is just so hard. It's just so ridiculously hard. And now that I've got most of the way through making one, I definitely know what they're talking about. But also I've been really surprised by how some things are really hard and some things are really easy. There's a bunch of things that are just much easier than I thought they would be. And in fact, a lot of things that are really hard are to do with particular types of games rather than stuff that you absolutely have to do. And so basically what I'd like to do is tell you what I've learned about how to make a game more quickly and more easily. Because if someone had given me that talk before I started, I would probably be finished by now. And, well, I'll get back to that. But there are a bunch of different lessons and surprises that I've come across making this. But all of them kind of come down to the same thing, which is that all of the things I've done well in Gunpoint have been things that didn't take me very long to make, and which people really enjoy, and they enjoy them again and again and again. So you can throw yourself through windows in this game, and it makes a good glass smashing noise, and bits of glass go everywhere, and that wasn't very hard to do. That's a pretty easy thing to program, and people love it every time they do it. You see I've been watching people play at Minecon, and I'm standing behind them creepily to see how they play, and they're kind of like just impassive for most of it. And then when they jump through their first window, I always see their shoulders jog as they're kind of laughing at it. So there's a bunch of things like that, which are, so that thing right there, that was me. I wired a light switch to a door, and then flicked the light switch as the guard was right next to it, and the door opened in his face and knocked him out. That was something that I didn't think of until I was actually making it, and took like half an hour to make it work, and people love it. Almost every tester who gives me feedback mentions that if they found it. So this is where the rewiring stuff gets a bit complicated, and I won't talk you through the whole level. So I'll skip on to what I've actually learned from making it. And there's a bunch of things that went really well and a bunch of things that went really badly. And so some of what I've learned is not, some of it's surprises and things that contradicted what I thought I knew about games, and some of it is stuff that I suspected might work, and it did work. So there's a few things that did go well. And the first thing that I did right was I actually started making it. This is a strong first move in development. If you actually start making something, it tends to go better. So that sounds like a stupid thing to be proud of, but for about 6 years before this, I wanted to make a game, and I just assumed I couldn't. I just assumed it couldn't be done. Like, it was like wanting to be the CEO of a company. You can't actually do it unless you have a bunch of people who are willing to do what you say and make it actually happen. But I never kind of looked into it. I didn't find out whether that was actually true anymore. And the reason I did start in the end was that I found out a game called Spelunky is made in GameMaker. And Spelunky is a platformer where the levels are randomly generated. So like Minecraft, every time you start the game, it's completely new. And every level you play will be totally different. And it looks very simple, and it's extremely difficult. But the fact that it's randomized makes it just endlessly fun. I've played it 1,233 times on PC and about 800 times on console. And I still absolutely love it. It's probably my favorite platformer of all time. And that was made in GameMaker, which is a thing I knew was aimed at beginners. I'd never used it myself, but I knew it was one of those, like, my first game type tools. And so I'd always been really derisive about it. I thought you couldn't make anything like really good in one of those tools because, I don't know, there'd be some kind of hard limit to what you could do with it. And finding out that someone had made my favorite platform of all time in a tool that beginners can use made me realize, okay, I should probably actually try and make a game because it's clearly doable. Really it made me realize that how good a game can be doesn't come down to the tech you use to make it. It's just, if you are a good enough designer, you can make something really, really fun from something that's very easy to use. So the first thing I did wrong was I started with quite an ambitious idea. So Gunpoint, as I say, is a game about infiltration. You're sneaking into buildings and breaking into them. And as I started to kind of develop it, I added that cross-link thing, which is where you rewire the building to make it work the way you want it to work. So that's kind of a big chunk of design work. And then I also decided that I would have my own special jumping mechanic that other people don't use, where you aim with the mouse and you see your trajectory before you jump, and you can kind of like leap halfway up buildings because you've got some special gadget trousers. There's quite a sort of complicated plot involving all the different clients you work for have their own little story going on, and each of those stories kind of ties together to tell a bigger story. And it was originally going to have a sort of complex branching idea with the plot, where if you screwed up a mission, you could still, as long as you didn't die, you would be able to carry on with the game, and then the client would just have to react to the fact that you didn't do the mission right, and that now they hate you, and now you can't take any more missions for them. And that's the one thing I did scrap, because when I started to look into that, I realized it was just going to mean I had to make a bunch of missions that most people wouldn't play, and as I'll get to later, when you're working alone, which I was at the time, making stuff by hand is incredibly time-consuming, and you can't really afford to spend time making missions that most people aren't going to see. So I scrapped that, but I still had a pretty ambitious set of things. It's trying to do lots of different mechanics, lots of different ideas, lots of different level types. And I posted about this on my blog, so I thought a good way to kind of make sure I stuck to this game was to announce it publicly before I'd even made it. I was just going to say, here's what I plan to do, here's my hopes for this game. And if I say it publicly, it will just be too embarrassing to stop. I'll just be too ashamed to stop making it. And that worked, actually. It didn't turn out to be as necessary as I thought it would be. But I announced on my blog what I was going to do, and a few people commented on it, and the guys who have development experience commented to say, this sounds a bit ambitious for your first game, Tom. And I thought, screw you! I'm going to make this despite you. Like, I thought they were saying, you could never make a game this good, Tom. So I got really defensive, and anytime you get defensive, you're about to make a really stupid decision. So instead of like asking them, oh, why do you think it's too ambitious, or what do you think I should do instead? I didn't say anything at all. I just thought, right, I'm going to make this the best goddamn game. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care how hard it is. I'm going to make this incredible. And if I just listened to them, they probably would have told me that what I'm going to tell you now, which is it's much more efficient and you will end up making a much better game if your first one is super simple. If it's like Pac-Man, or if it's just a top-down thing with one blob and some other blobs, and you just mess around with that and figure out how to make them interact in a fun way. Just give the player something he can do and see if it's fun. And then finish that game, like take it all the way through, make a menu for it, saving and loading, make new levels for it, make it ready to release publicly, and then do release it publicly, and see what people think of it, and add levels to it, and change it in response to what they say about it. And so long as that core game is really, really simple, that whole process won't take too long. It'll probably still take longer than you think, but I wish my central game was simple enough that I could have just got through all of those things and found out which ones of those are difficult, which ones are worth doing, which ones aren't worth doing, and then started on Gunpoint, the ambitious one. Because there's so many different bits to Gunpoint, each one of the things you have to do to finish a game and to get it working becomes much more time-consuming and complicated and difficult for someone who's never done it before, and of course I've never done any of these things before. So yeah, I wish I had listened to my friends instead of getting angry about it. The next thing I did well was, so I mentioned just now, what I wish I'd done is I'd started with like a top-down game with like a blob and some other blobs and just figured out a fun way for them to interact. And that's one of the things that is easier than I thought it would be. Just the actual kind of logic of how a game works is really simple. It's quick to program, it's easy for a beginner to understand how it works, it's really easy to make something, and it's really surprising how fun it can be. With Gunpoint, I had like just a jumping mechanic that I put in very early on, which was very sort of, it's a bit like firing a catapult, but you fire yourself. So it's a sort of an arc trajectory rather than a normal platformer where you'd press jump and then you have some control in the air of where you go. And I was really surprised at how easy that was to make and how fun it was once I made it. So the thing I did right with Gunpoint was I just kept tinkering with those systems until I had something I was really, really excited about, and that was the rewiring mechanic, the fact that you can just link up any two electronic devices and they will activate each other. And again, that was another thing that was much easier than I thought it would be. That sounded like a really advanced, kind of complicated thing, and I hadn't seen it done in another game before, so I kind of figured there must be some reason you can't do this. And then I tried it, and it just worked, and it was really fun. And so the thing I did right there was I didn't spend a lot of time making levels or doing art or planning out the story or deciding how the game was going to unfold until I had that one thing already working, like I had a fun mechanic that is just enjoyable to mess around with. And the reason that's a good way to do it is that every second you spend making a game before you have that fun thing in might be a complete waste of time. You might be just, barking up the wrong tree. So you could be making levels that aren't going to make sense for the mechanic that you actually end up using. With Gunpoint, before I made it, I thought that the thing that would be fun about it would be holding people at gunpoint, that's the thing you can do in the game. You aim a gun at somebody and they won't shoot you while you have them at gunpoint, because that's a scene that comes up in a lot of movies, and there's sort of this implied logic that if you shoot somebody, they might shoot you back because they're in their like death spasm. And I was always excuse me. I was always really interested in that like tense moment in a movie, and I wondered how that would work in a game and whether it would be fun if you were actually in that situation and you had the choice of whether to shoot the other guy or let him shoot you or what. And that, it worked. I programmed that, it's in the game and you can do it, and it is tense. You have to hold down the right mouse button to keep your gun aimed, and the second you let go, you'll get shot. So it kind of works on that level, but it didn't end up being kind of the core of a good game. It didn't feel like that mechanic had that much going on. There wasn't that much more you could really do with it. Whereas the crosslink thing, as soon as that was working, I thought, like, this felt like it had so much potential, and it felt like if I can't make a good game out of that, I'm probably just an idiot and I should stop. So you can't always predict what the good mechanic is going to be, so until you've made it and it works, you shouldn't waste any time making anything else. The next thing I did wrong was kind of the same thing, which is this cross-linking mechanic with the rewiring. it's really fun, and clearly it's possible to make a good game out of it, and I hope I have, but something I didn't really understand about it when I started working on it was it's a puzzle game mechanic. It's a way of getting around an obstacle that you cannot otherwise get around. It's got nothing to do with skill or aim or reaction time. I was intentionally trying to make a game that you would be able to think your way around, so that the only kind of limit to how well you do is how smart you are or how creative you can think. Which is good, and I wanted to do that, but I didn't really realize I was making a puzzle game, and I also didn't know the disadvantage of making a puzzle game, which is that puzzles are things that usually have to be made by a human brain. It's very hard to auto-generate puzzles, and I sort of guessed it would be, so I didn't try to make a random level generator or anything, because I was worried that if I did that, it would just generate levels that would be either trivially easy to solve or impossible to solve, and there wouldn't be many in that middle space. Because when you're playing a puzzle game, if you're playing something like Portal, every puzzle you encounter will be one that you can't solve using the exact same method you just used for the last puzzle, because Valve are very efficient with that. And so every puzzle tries to exist in that point on the difficulty spectrum where I've never had to solve this problem before, but it's not totally beyond me. I'm not incapable of understanding it. And that's something you kind of need to build by hand. And so I was going to say, this is one of the things I learned, that building content by hand is really time-consuming and difficult. And if you're working alone or in a small team, it's not a very efficient use of your time. And that's all true. But it's not true that I learned this making Gunpoint, because actually I've been told that in the many interviews I've done with indie developers. Chris DeLay, who's here showing Prison Architect, told me about 7 years ago, content is what kills you as an indie, and he just finished making Darwinia, which was, he made that pretty much by himself as well. And it's got this beautiful graphical style, it's got these amazing systems, it's an incredibly smart game, and he said the thing that just killed him doing it was making the levels. And I think there's only about 10 or 12 levels in that game, and that was just, the vast majority of his time. And I forgot that, and then made a whole game ignoring that advice. But now I'm back, and I'm going to tell you exactly what he told me. So the kind of, it's worth knowing that before you start making a game, because if you possibly can, it's great to have a mechanic that, or an idea for a game where it's going to be possible to randomly generate levels. So that's easier with a game that's skill-based, something where the player can kind of overcome a difficult challenge if he's good enough. And obviously, Minecraft is a great example of how good random level generation can be and how much that can add to a game. The next thing I did well, this is also advice I'd had from everyone I've ever interviewed about games. Well, not quite everyone, but everyone will tell you that you need to test early and test often, which means I took that to heart, perhaps to an absurd extent, in that after like 1 week of just messing around in Game Maker with my first game, having no idea how to code or anything, all I had was like a little block that you could fling around by clicking, and I sent that to testers. So that was when my beta testing started for Gunpoint. And there were only about 5 people who had signed up to test it at that point. But even then, it was actually really useful. They told me things that I knew this was not a finished game, and that it had lots wrong with it. But the testers told me that it was really hard to judge where your jump was going to go. And I sort of already knew that, but I wasn't sure how I was going to solve that problem. And I thought maybe I'd have like some kind of power meter, like the way Worms works, if you've ever fired a bazooka in Worms. But testers had so many problems jumping, and everybody mentioned how hard it was to judge your jump, that I thought, okay, this is something I need to solve this completely. I need to have a perfect answer for this. And so that's when I put in the thing where you can see an exact trajectory of where you're going to jump, so you know exactly what's going to happen. And like I say, that was like a couple of weeks into starting making the game, so already testing was making it better. And of course it saves time if you spot something like that really early on before there's anything else going on in the game, and you can make it better. That's a huge time saver. And also there's kind of a myth about testing that if you test your game too much, you end up dumbing it down, and it becomes a sort of mass market thing, or it becomes less personal, or it becomes too easy. And in my experience, that hasn't happened. And I don't think it's true as a general principle, because so far at least, I haven't seen any cases where a tester can reach in and change your code and just overwrite what you've done in your game. Like, testers don't actually change your game. All they can do is just tell you what they think of it. And I've never had to do anything on Gunpoint in response to testing feedback. And I never have made it less complicated or less advanced or less personal to what I wanted to make. So I think it's a myth that testing does that. I think the only way that happens is if you're just either not very good at understanding what testing feedback means, or you just decide to try and please everybody and just do whatever testers say. And I mean, you can probably imagine what Minecraft would be like if Notch just did everything that people suggested he did with it. It would get nasty pretty quickly. So what I found was that if I make something in Gunpoint and testers write back to me and say, I don't like this, or this isn't working for me, or I didn't enjoy it, or you should take it out, the answer is almost never to do what they say, and it's also almost never to ignore them. But once you understand the problem they're having, it's usually pretty obvious that there's a third way around it. There's another way to do this that is going to solve the problem the tester is having, and also either be as good from my perspective, or the thing I'm finding increasingly is that the solution I come up with is better than the one I had in the first place. So like with that jumping mechanic, I thought it was okay. I was kind of, I knew it wasn't perfect, but I understood it and I could use it fairly well. And then when testers told me it didn't work at all for them, I decided to really make it as good as I possibly could. And that wasn't very hard to do. And then once I'd done it, the fact that you can see exactly where you're going to jump has improved the game massively for me. And that keeps happening every time. Every time I have to change something because I want to make it better for somebody, I end up making it better for myself as well. I end up just enjoying the game more. And that's a huge thing because obviously you do a lot of testing yourself. You're going to be playing your own game as you're making it. And making that process more fun is a big help. That just makes it much easier to enjoy the process. And also, testing makes game development more fun anyway, just because you're hearing what people think of your game. So you should do this even if, like I say, like 1 week into just trying your first game, try sending it to some people and see what they think. Because they will understand that it's not meant to be a finished game. And the thing I didn't expect was that I got some positive feedback on that first prototype. Like, people didn't just tell me what they thought was wrong with it, they told me what they liked about it and where it might go from here. And that's incredibly motivating. Like, I think the days where you just work on something in obscurity for years and then release it, that makes it this big monolithic task that you're working on. It makes it very daunting, very kind of lonely in a way, and kind of miserable, like just working on one thing that only you have seen. It's easy to doubt yourself, it's easy to lose track of what you're doing, and it's easy to just kind of get depressed. I hear this from a lot of developers who I know don't do regular tests. They don't want to show their work until it's done. They have real trouble staying motivated and staying happy doing it. Whereas if you're sending out to testers regularly, it's just amazing the effect it can have on your mood. Like, hearing people that have already enjoyed the thing that you've made is incredibly exciting. And it makes you more excited as you're working on the next thing, because then you're thinking about how they're going to react to that. And that side of it's just gone brilliantly for me. You do also have to deal with negative feedback, and sometimes the negative feedback is exactly what you don't want to hear. Sometimes it's someone will have a problem with something and they'll suggest a solution to it, which you already know isn't going to work because you tried it that way, or you can foresee a problem that they haven't seen with it, and you read that and you just think, no, it can't be that way, and you kind of want to write back to them and explain why, but that's a slippery slope to go down. But in general, it's much more motivating than it is the opposite. So the other thing I did wrong was I made a game that has a story, which is not necessarily bad in every situation. And I like stories, and games can tell stories well. And in fact, games can tell stories in really interesting ways. But a linear, pre-written story, i.e. the kind of thing you'd write a script for, is by definition you saying, this will happen, and then this will happen, and then this will happen. And that's pretty much the opposite of the essence of games, of interactive games anyway, which is that the player has some abilities or some tools that he can use, and he's allowed to do whatever he likes with them because you've told him he can. And so when people told me making games is really hard, I think one of the main things they're talking about is what you have to do in mainstream game development, if you're making like a Call of Duty game or something like that, where there is a pre-written story, but the player is in it, and he's supposed to have freedom. He's supposed to be able to shoot whoever he likes and run around and do whatever he likes. And you've got to figure out how to make sure the plot still happens the way you want it to happen. Not because that's the best way for it to happen, but just because you don't know how the game should react if it doesn't. So you would think, I've made that point in reviews, I've criticized people for doing that loads and loads of times. Some of my reviews are often exasperated by people's determination to have a pre-written plot in a game that should be interactive. And then I did it myself. So I know why it happened. It was because I thought I could fix all of the problems in gaming myself with no resources, and so I was going to have a plot that would just adapt to whatever you did, and you would be able to kill important characters, and I would just have to figure out how that works. And like I say, when I looked into that, I realized the amount of hand-built content I would have to make that would never get seen by most people was just going to be prohibitively huge. It was just going to mean the game was going to take 6 years if I did that. It would be ridiculous. So without realizing it, I took that out, but it still had a story in there. And if I just sort of resigned myself to the fact that I'm just not going to do a story for my first game, it's just going to be, the mechanics are fun, you're just going to play this fun level and solve these cool puzzles, and that will be the game, it would probably be finished by now. It would be much, much quicker to do. So if you do want to make a game with a story in it, I think if it's your first game, you would do well to just focus on the story and make that the sort of centerpiece. And if the story isn't good enough for that, or if you don't have a really interesting way to tell it, it's probably best to just leave it out and, like I say, make the simplest game in the world, make Pac-Man first. And then you'll have an idea of what you can and can't do with story. So the next thing that went well was I explained how Gunpoint works in a video. And that wasn't the video you saw when you came in. It was a much, much uglier and worse one than that. Because this was at a stage where I was still working on Gunpoint alone. And I'm not an artist, so it had my placeholder programmer art in it. And it looked really, really bad. But as a journalist, I'm always trying to find cool indie games. And most indie developers know that they should make a trailer now. But there seems to be a sort of habit of making trailers that are just a series of bits of footage of the game being played in isolation, so just little moments of action and things that are probably really cool if you made the game and you know exactly what's happening in them. But to people who've never played the game, it's just nonsense. It's just, you know, this block exploded and then fired a thing at that block and that exploded too. And even if that looks really flashy and cool, and even if you've got great art, that doesn't make me interested in it as a journalist or people interested in it as gamers, because you don't know what you're doing in it. Like, the time when I get excited by watching a games trailer is when I realize, oh, I can do that. I can, like, you know, I can change perspective and it will solve a puzzle in this way, or I understand who I am, what I'm doing, and why it's interesting. And I didn't have a great solution for how to do that in a slick, kind of fancy trailer. So I did it just the most straightforward way possible. I just played the game and I talked like I'm talking now over me playing the game. And I did a really bad job of it. It was terrible. The game was really ugly. I didn't really know, I'd never done a voiceover before and I was a little bit kind of nervous about that. You're always a little bit self-conscious about, you know, having your voice on a thing that you're just going to release to the public. Because it's like a performance, and if you're like a pasty nerd like me who's been programming and writing in a darkened room, it feels like too much exposure. But I knew it had to be done because it was the exact thing I wish developers would do as a journalist. I always want developers to do this, and they very rarely do. So I just explained the game. And even though that trailer was bad in so many other ways, the fact that the game had an interesting concept and I explained what the concept was directly, meant it got way more attention than I ever thought it could. It got much more press, it got on major gaming blogs. And in the video, because it was so ugly, I asked if any artists wanted to help me out and make it look better. And at the time, it was going to be a free game, so I wasn't even offering any money. But I got 27 artists offering to do the art for my game for free. And that's just because I explained what the concept was. That, like, all of them were interested in it because they liked the idea, and they knew what the idea was because I just said what the idea was in the video. So that's something I wish people would do more. And then the video that I was playing when you came in, that one is pretty much the same idea. I played it this time for 8 minutes whilst talking over it. And I did a better job of actually making the video, but still, almost anyone will tell you, don't make an 8-minute long trailer, that's crazy. But again, I explained exactly how the game worked, and the game looked a lot better than it did last time, and that did even better press-wise. It's got just an insane amount of attention, much, much more than I ever thought it possibly could. And there's two interesting things about that. One is explaining your game is a good idea, and the other is that video got all of the exposure I could imagine getting. It's the absolute best-case scenario, beyond my wildest dreams. And it's got about sort of 290,000 views, I think, on YouTube, which is good for an indie game trailer. And then Total Biscuit featured Gunpoint. And his video alone has 380,000 views. So if you're ever thinking about promoting a game, bear in mind that the sum total of all of the gaming press working together to promote your thing will be slightly less powerful than Total Biscuit on his own. And the Yogscast, I think, would be even bigger. Yes? Notch. Yep. Yeah, so Notch did link to that trailer. So yeah, it was with it was Kotaku, Joystick, PC Gamer, Rock Paper Shotgun, all of the game blogs I can think of, and Notch, and Penny Arcade all linked to that trailer, and still got fewer views than Total Biscuit's version, which is mind-blowing. But worth knowing if you're ever promoting a game. The funny thing is, Total Biscuit didn't even really like it that much. Like, he doesn't really like puzzle games, so he kind of, he got a bit confused and frustrated, and he was trying to do quite a nice thing, which he was trying to show his viewers that you could solve levels in lots of different ways. So he was playing levels that he knew how to solve, and he'd refused to do the solution he knew, so he'd be trying everything else, and it was really kind of painful to watch at times. And he knew that and said so in the video. So his like overall impression was, yeah, this isn't really my kind of game, but still got me masses of attention and loads of new fans and testers and stuff. So yeah, those are the main things I learned about making games more efficiently. But the other thing that I've learned, now that I've kind of seen the industry from both sides, and I've been on the development side and the press side at the same time, it's become clear how much everything has changed. Like I say, I've been writing about games for 9 years, and since that time, all of the rules about what can be successful and what can't have totally changed. And Minecraft is the best possible example of that. Like, Minecraft shows that high polygon bump mapped graphics are not the only thing that can be massively commercially successful, and that people aren't snobbish about that anymore. Minecraft is kind of beautiful in its own way, but it's a very unconventional look that would have been hard to get. You know, if you pitched that to a publisher 9 years ago, it would have been very hard to get it into a box that you could then sell on shelves, which back then was the big time. That was how you got your game successful. Marketing isn't necessary to make a game popular anymore. Notch didn't have to buy any ads to make Minecraft successful. That kind of happened on its own. And publishers aren't the only way to get funding. So it wouldn't have mattered that if Notch had gone to publishers with Minecraft and they didn't want it, because he doesn't need publishers to release it, and neither do you, and neither do I. I've been approached by quite a few publishers, and some of them are really nice guys and want to help out, but it always comes to the point where I just realize you can't really do anything for me that I can't do myself. Like, all of the systems that would stop you releasing a game have gone away. And you can just do it yourself, basically. Even Steam, which is, if you're releasing a game on PCs, like whether or not you get on Steam is kind of the critical issue of how well you're going to do. And even that isn't decided by Valve anymore. Now they've turned it over to the community, and Steam Greenlight lets anyone vote on any game that's been submitted and decide which ones they're most excited about. And it's not a perfect system, and Valve aren't completely out of it. They do check the games. But in every case, it's all of the things that used to stop you from releasing a game have gone away. And all of the old systems were things that you couldn't control. They were things where somebody somewhere is going to decide whether your game's successful, and it will depend on whether they like it or their kind of predictions of its commercial value or whatever kind of business logic they had. And all of those people are either less relevant or irrelevant, or they've gone completely. And they've all been replaced by systems that you can control. They've all been replaced by things like Kickstarter and Steam Greenlight and all the ways that you can get a bunch of people excited about your game and make that happen. And the interesting thing about that, it's still people who decide whether your game's going to be successful, obviously, because people are who you're making it for. But now it's anyone. And that means that a really niche or strange game, as long as it finds, X number of people excited about it, it doesn't matter who those people are, it doesn't matter where they are, it doesn't matter if it's a weird kind of niche market in Germany that you would never predict would be as big as it is. And that happens all the time. We see this in working with PC Gamer, seeing what is successful on PC and what isn't. The farm simulator games and the rail simulator games, the DLC you can buy for some of these things goes into like £300, like 500 euros, and people buy it and people love it, and it's doing incredibly well. And even though I don't particularly like rail simulator games, I have no special interest in them. Damn it, I knew that should have been unpopular. I love that it is successful. I love that it's that there's a big community for it, and that's what decides whether it does well. So it's the age of the indie right now, and the upshot of that is that the limiting factor on whether you can make a game or not is yourself. It's whether you just mentally have the ability to do it, and so that's something that I can sort of guess about. So I've nearly finished a game, so I can't quite tell you what it takes to finish a game because I haven't done it. But I'm most of the way through it, and I've made something that people have fun with, and it's gone down incredibly well. It's been much more successful than I thought it could have been. And I think my conclusion about what it takes to make a game is just that you need a brain and a bit of creativity and the ability to keep working on a project that excites you for a long time without getting bored. And if you've played Minecraft, you might know something about that mindset. If you've ever built like a massive fortress or a complicated redstone contraption or anything intricate in Minecraft, when I'm working on something like that in the game, what I'm doing moment to moment isn't very interesting. I'm like chipping away at blocks or I'm laying redstone circuitry, and I don't get bored doing it. I don't even think about what I'm doing because I'm just focused on this final thing that I'm going to make, and it's going to be really cool. And the excitement of that keeps you going through it. So if you play like that, and if you think like that, and if you make cool, creative things in Minecraft, you already have the perfect mindset to make a game. And like I say, that's happening in a time when the mindset to make a game is all you actually need to do it, and the systems for doing it are much easier, the tools that you use are much easier to use. All of the things that determine whether your game is successful or not are much more forgiving and much more fair than they ever used to be. So I'm doing this on top of my full-time job, and it's just gone incredibly well. It's gone far, far better than I ever could have hoped when I started doing it. And like I say, I was inspired to start by this game Spelunky. And 2 years after starting, my game was nominated for the same award that Spelunky was. So Spelunky won, of course, which it richly deserved to. But just being up for the same thing as the game that inspired me to start making games was just an amazing experience and an incredible honor. And yesterday I had another amazing moment, which was, like I say, Gunpoint is playable at the Minecon over in Times Square, and there's 2 computers playing it. And a father and son came up and started playing. And the son was about 13 years old. And they played for a while, and when I checked their screens, I realized that the dad was on like level 3 and the son was on like level 7 or 8. And the dad's just sitting there kind of scratching his head. And I just saw the son reach over and just grab his mouse and keyboard and just show him how it's done. It was almost hard to describe like why that was so cool for me to see, but it was, I felt like I'd created a world in which this little boy had got to have a moment where he was like, look, Dad, here's how it's done, So I almost missed out on that and on all the other cool things that have happened since I started making this because I didn't start. So for 6 years, I just thought I couldn't do it, and so I never even tried to do it. And so if any of you have ever had the urge to make a game, if you've ever had an idea for a game, I hope you don't make that mistake. Thanks.
I think that we have time for a couple of questions. Do we have any questions in the audience? Yes, let's see.
Hi. So you did say that one of the problem you have is making content for the game.
Yeah.
And a big thing for a game is the community, of course. Do you plan on making a level design creation?
Excellent question, thank you. Yes, there is a level editor. And that's something that I always wanted to do it. I always thought that would be a good idea for this game because it is just, because it's based on real life buildings. They're actually quite simple to make in theory. And it's just the puzzle bit that's difficult and time consuming. So yeah, I always wanted to make a level editor and I wasn't sure if I could do it. And again, I almost didn't try, but then I thought I'm just going to give this a go and I set aside one day to just find out whether a level editor could be done. And in the time I set aside to test whether it could be done, I sort of did it. My test version of it just kind of worked. And the reason I kind of did decide to do one was actually using Portal 2. Have you used that? It's got a level editor that they added after release, which is a totally different view to the game, and it's totally different to any other level editor I've seen. It's all very slick and very nice to use, and you just have a menu down the side and you drag items from the menu into the world, and it's really satisfying. And so I just copied that wholesale, really. Like the Gunpoint level editor, there's just a list of objects down the side and you just drag them into the level, and it's really simple to use, and it was quite easy to make, really. So yeah, we'll have one. The only problem with that, of course, is that you don't have those levels in the game when you launch, so it's not a total solution to the problem of that the levels are really hard to make, because when I release Gunpoint, some people will say, hey, this is too short, it's only got 25 missions or whatever. So yeah, it doesn't totally solve the problem of you can't sort of launch with no levels and hope the community will make them all for you.
Hey, hi. I kind of might have two questions, might be one. I'm kind of one of those ADHD people that I need everything perfect. And recently you have put in the game those bars where it shows how good you did the level.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Would
You're
it be
gonna
possible?
hate me, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, I love that, but would it be possible to, or do you plan to put them in the game so I can see what I've done when I screw up?
Yes. Yeah, I thought about that recently, actually. So the question is about when you finish a level in Gunpoint, you get, this gentleman is one of my testers, so he's played it, and when you finish a level, you see ratings for things like how many witnesses you left, how many people you killed, how much noise you made, and one other thing. And the game doesn't tell you it doesn't tell you like, oh, you're supposed to do it silently or you're supposed to do it without killing anyone. So it's kind of up to you to come up with your own ideas for what you care about. But also the clients you're working for will sometimes have preferences. So one of your clients is just a really nice person, and so they'll always ask you, please don't kill anyone if you can possibly avoid it. And you don't have to, but you get rating bars at the end. And the question is, will you be able to check what your rating is in the mission? And yeah, I do want to do that because if you've played Dishonored and you try to do a non-lethal playthrough in that, it's incredibly annoying that you don't know when someone dies, because when you knock somebody out, anything that happens to that body will kill them. They can slide down like one step and they'll die, or if they're near some water, they'll find a way to drown, and you don't know that's happened until you finish the level, and then you find out, oh, I killed somebody on that level, and you've got to start again. So yeah, I do want anything that's important to your performance should be something that you can find out how you're doing so far in the level, and I want to explain those things a bit better as well. So I found actually playing this level, in fact, I have to play my game a lot and have to play every level many, many ways. And by this stage, I've already done all of the possible solutions I can think of several times. And the time when I suddenly found a load more different cool things to do was when I tried to play this level without anyone seeing me and without killing anyone. So you just have to avoid every guard. You can't ever. Right, and you can't be seen or jump on anyone because they see you when you pin them to the ground, you're punching them in the face. So at that point, they're either unconscious and therefore a witness, or you kill them and therefore you've killed somebody and you fail in that way. And it was really interesting how it was possible to do this level without hurting anybody, which I didn't plan for when I designed it. But also just it's really fun to come up with an idea for how you want to play and then stick to that.
All right, great. We have one last question here.
Hi. How do you think Steam Greenlight has changed things, and what are some of the kinks they still have to work out?
I think it's a positive thing in general. So Steam Greenlight is where everyone can vote on what gets on Steam, and anyone can submit their game for consideration. The twist to that, which they added after they launched it, was that you have to pay $100 to get your game just listed on Steam Greenlight, which doesn't guarantee you getting on Steam, of course. And if you have $100, then that's great, because it's profoundly worth $100 to have a chance of getting on Steam. But if you're absolutely broke, then that kind of sucks. The system is obviously not perfect. I think the problem with it is not that the sheer number of votes you need to get on, because I don't think that's actually how it's working. I think they are just looking at what is getting the most attention, and they're probably paying a little bit of attention to what doesn't get a lot of downvotes. And then they're kind of picking from those things what they actually think they should put on. So I think it's more of a hybrid system than maybe it realizes. And the rate at which they're putting games up is not to do with the Greenlight system. So that's something I've heard a lot of complaints about, is they're just picking so few things that I feel like I have no chance of getting my game on Steam ever. That was already true before Greenlight. You already had no chance of getting a game on Steam ever, because they get absolutely flooded with submissions, and the rate at which they put things on Steam is just as fast as they humanly can. I've talked to them about this, and they just have only a certain amount of capacity that they can. They launch like several games every day, and they can't do it any faster. So I think the public voting for what they want is a pretty good basis for a system, because it's the public who are actually going to be buying them or not. I personally prefer that to the old system where someone at Valve might see your game, or they might not, or it might get to the wrong person. And there's been loads of really brilliant stuff submitted to Valve that they either completely ignored or said no to. And then later it went on to become popular by itself, and then they said, oh, well, that's really good, we'll have that on Steam. So the old system was terrible. The new system is imperfect. And I think, you asked me what some of the kinks were, and I think right now it's that you have to do it on a video and some screenshots and your description of it, and there isn't a kind of built-in way to put your demo on there. I think once you can put a demo on there, and there's like a sort of special category for games that you can play right now to see whether you think they're good enough for Steam, then the system will get a lot more fair.
All right, great. One little question. So where can we find the game, and how much does it cost?
That's a good one. So it's not out yet. Still working on it. But it's gunpointgame.com is the website. It's Gunpoint Game on Twitter. And you can sign up. So people keep asking me about the release date, and I don't know, because that's one of the things I've learnt, is that you never know. Like, I've never done it before, so I have no idea how long the rest of the work is going to take. But what you can do is, there's a little link to sign up to be told when it's out. So this is a system that somebody suggested to me. I'm like, yeah, I should do that. Everyone should do that. You should have a way to just enter your email address, and you'll get an email when this game is released, and you don't get anything else. There's no spam, or it's not a newsletter. It's just, when my game is finished, I'll tell you about it. You can also sign up to test it, but I don't make any guarantees about when those testing builds go out, because it just comes down to when I need feedback and when I've got a build that's ready to send to people. So it might not be anytime soon, but
cool. All right, Tom Francis with Gunpoint.